So, I think what Fernanda was pointing out is that there are structural needs that we have in the department, and it precisely has to do with the idea of cultural integration and the concept of intercultural engagement, which is one of the kind of goals in general. So basically, it's how the first and second language cultures interact in the classroom. The consequence of this, of not having this approach, is that language and culture are totally divorced, and then we have cultural units on one side, and then we have language units on the other, and then students don't really transfer seamlessly from one to another. Also is the idea that language is being treated as an instrument in itself. In the instrumentalist view, it's a goal in itself instead of the medium, and the medium should be to gain access to different cultures within the Spanish-speaking world. And as a consequence, university departments face the danger of becoming language academies, and therefore they will become irrelevant, because we have multiple language academies, we have online interfaces. In fact, you could see these developments happening in the US as online teaching is being substituted in language departments, because you could just have an enhanced online platform, and then therefore you don't really need the language department anymore, so you start closing down language departments. And then of course Spanish is so much more important in the US, and they cannot really do that with Spanish, but they have done it with Italian, they have done it with Portuguese, they have done it with multiple other minor languages. And so there is a need for innovation, and we need to innovate, and we need to stay on top of our game. And then the theory is that we want our students to become intercultural speakers. The practice is that English starts getting more importance in the classroom as a facilitating tool. So it's a conceptual bridge. English is not going to substitute Spanish, but it's gonna become a tool that we can use in the classroom to bridge between concepts. Another aspect is that we're going to focus on this concept of intercultural community competence. And what this translates to practice is that we're not going to, in assessment, which is the most obvious one, we're not only going to focus on language precision. So language that basically grammar, right? When it's not contextual, it's unconnected, you don't really need a context to assess ser and estar. Ser and estar could basically translate to multiple contexts. Now we're going to need a context. So the emphasis is going to be on cultural and language appropriateness. And that's a key term in there. So it's contextual and it's interconnected. Another principle is that we moved it from this idea that our students must achieve a native-like command, that would be the ultimate desirable goal. And then we need to realize that that's just simply not possible. That is also being kind of debunked in second language pedagogy. We are not in a total immersion context. So in practice, what this means is that language is a key to a very diverse cultural paradigm, which is Spain and Latin America, but even beyond Spain and Latin America, in contexts like sometimes Africa, where Spanish is also spoken, in Guinea Equatorial, for instance. So now language has a new goal, and this goal is to have access to cultural concepts in the Spanish-speaking world, as Fernanda talked about before. So I'm going to go now into the course structure and what this would look like. So I'm going to start from the more general. I'm going to go into the more specific, which is hour per hour. So the course structure is going to be have this division. So we have conceptual modules, and they're divided bi-weekly. So we have identities, language, bodies, emotions, borders and memories, and then we have these cultural concepts that are developed within these modules. So for instance, in week 1 and 2, we develop Latino identity, indigenous identity, and racism. In languages, we develop what good versus bad Spanish, and then multiple ways, right? And then and for memories at the end, the colonial past. And then of course we keep our linguistic side of things, and as you can see, it's roughly divided 50%, 50%. So now what means culture is going to take 50% of the time, but it's going to be integrated, and I will show you how it's going to be done more specifically. But then the only new things that are introduced in level 1, for instance, is just a brief introduction of the predicate in comparison with the present, and this is done after mid-semester. It's always in comparison with the present, and it has to do, and this is driven by cultural modules, because we need, for instance, when we talk about the colonial past, we need to refer to the past and the present, and we need to introduce the past tense already here. Okay, so then an important part is that we have self-study now. So a lot of the grammar, it's going to be outsourced to different online linguistic units. So we're going to have videos, we're going to have self-corrected quizzes, and then students are going to be expected to self-study these parts, and we will hold their hands in the cultural part as opposed to the linguistic part. But I'll show you exactly how this is done. So in the weekly structure, so we go from the course structure to the weekly structure. In the weekly structure, this is what it would look like: Spanish level 1, the first and the second week. In here, you can see that there is a text that they have to read. There is always a pre-self-study and a post-self-study. And then the assessment, we're going to start right away with a written reflection and of 150, 200 words. And the difference now is that we're going to change the way we assess this, especially in level 1, because we're not looking so much at precision, and not in this part. We're going to be looking at precision in other parts. But in here, we want them to start writing, and we wanted to start having an acquaintance with how the problems with writing, and that is going to go hand in hand with culture. But I will show you at some other point how this is going to be assessed. So it's important to have in mind that the assessment of writing for this exercise is going to change. So on our daily structure, we meet twice a week, 2 hours, and before class there's a preparation activity, and that is usually tied to a cultural reading or some kind of short video, sometimes even a film, and they have to prepare this text before class, and there are guidelines onto how to prepare this. So we want to convey the idea that they don't have to know every single word in a text to get the overall or the general idea of what the text is about, because we're interested in concepts, not so much into the very nitty-gritty details, especially in level 1. So we have a first hour cultural discussion that is going to be in English. So the text is in Spanish. The cultural discussion about that text or video is in English, so we help them fill in the gap. So in here, they don't know, they were totally lost, and they didn't know what the first part was about. We are going to provide that information. We're going to have discussion groups. We're going to have a sort of like kind of workshop-like environment. And the second hour, and this is like very clearly divided. First hour, cultural, second hour, linguistic. We're going to have a linguistic practice that most of the time is going to be tied to the context, to the cultural context. So now before the restaurant, La Tomatina, all these other cultural context was the context. Now the text is the context for the linguistic practice. And then we have an after-class self-study task that is usually tied to linguistic preparation. And so in the first hour, we have, like I said, it's an example. We introduce a cultural concept. They have to read a 500-word text. Never beyond 500 words. And then we have discussion in English. And then what we do is somehow for the second hour, we invert the pyramid. We have a kind of a flipped classroom scenario. Before we were kind of the guiding force, now they are the guiding force here. So they have to study language principles that are in the course reader, and the course reader have all kind of grammar explanations. They come to class to practice those grammar principles, and then at the end we review, we do a revision of the grammar principles. But they are the guiding force for the language. We are the guiding force for the culture. And that's overall how we're gonna do this, and I think later Beatriz and Macarena are gonna go into the even more specific details.